this polarization, because if you look at the alternative to what I just mentioned, which I'm not even going to talk about much because it isn't much, is just apology for the way things are. So in other words, there's the groups that I mentioned, the hardcore pantheists, and then sort of the socialist greens. That's one side of the equation. The other side right now, mostly, is economists who essentially just apologize for industry, just the way things are. Pollution to them is just, it's a side effect of being prosperous. It's just a fact of life, they deal with it. Whatever sort of side effects there are from that is just too bad. I want to argue that that approach isn't really a free market approach and that it's flawed. And that is the case that various, who I think are true free market economists make. And so that's how I'm going to approach the issue. So, but most economists then, not the ones who are apologizing for industry, but most economists in general, are essentially catering to the socialist greens. That's the approach they take. I mean, Marxism was an economic philosophy just as much as it was anything else. And it's really plainly and simply that. So I want to delve a little bit into what then the treatment is by most economists, what sort of the mainstream view is. If you go to most universities and you want to take a course on environmental policy and that sort of thing, they're getting right here. And what they do is they look at, they fault capitalism, and what they offer back as solutions is most of them don't go so far as to argue for an end of industry, an end of cars, automobiles, oil production. They just go back to what they do, which is Marxist analysis of economies. And so what they suggest, what they offer is ideas formulated on sort of timeless socialist principles. Here's how they break it down. They look at the environment and they look at natural resources as social goods. So, for example, the problem of pollution in the air, in the rivers, any sort of byproduct from industry, the very problem of who makes the pollution, who sort of is affected by it, they look at that as a mix-up of social goods. A social good is something that is not or should not be privately held. And this is where the whole concept, if you've heard it before, the tragedy of the commons, this is where that originates from. There's common property, common pasture, common forests, and as a result of having this common good that everyone, the private industry uses, we have the tragedy of the commons, and that comes from the externalities. The externalities is your pollution, your waste, things that they claim or they argue are not priced into the product. So for example, if you go and buy a car, I'm not an expert in how cars are made. I know they have plastic and steel and various things. So when you buy that car, there's various things priced into it. There's the cost of the R&D, research and innovation, that resulted, research and development that resulted in producing the technologies. There's the raw materials cost, so forth. And what they say is that the environmental costs, the cost of these social goods, are not priced in the product. And so when you go out and you buy your very environmentally friendly Prius hybrid, which might have recycled materials, in reality, it's very hard to argue that the costs of that are truly, the cost of the product are truly priced in. And that's where they come up with that. The efficiency thing is this. So since we have social goods, we have a problem with their use, and they go back to the old, it's as old as nature, it seems, the concept of an economy as needing to be in perfect equilibrium. As an aside real quick, if you look at the financial crisis in the last few years, really it's been decades in the making, but if you think of it in terms of 2007 to now, the approach they take is the same here. In other words, if you look at monetary policy and fiscal policy that got us into the crisis, you can argue that is just as complicated as this, because then you can start talking about Glass-Steagall, you can start talking about mortgages and derivatives, and you can get dizzy, but in reality, the cause of the crisis was pretty simple, and it boils down to just some of the basics of monetary policy and inflation, printing money, the incentives that were in the system. But in the same case with this, their efficiency model is based on your old economic models of perfect equilibrium. The problem is, I don't want to go into a full discussion, but the problems with that model works both ways, for environmental issues and for monetary and fiscal policy. And that is that, welcome. If you look at the treatment of the perfect equilibrium model, what that means is this. It means they're saying that all of us as individuals who make decisions somehow that all gets connected into an economy, and it arrives at a state where everything that's produced is what we want, it's what we need, and the economy arrives at perfect equilibrium through all these little individual units. That's an extremely simplistic approach, but if you think about it in summary, I would say the problems with that are the same problems that economists who look at the financial crisis apply, and that is that the economy truly is never in political equilibrium. It's not in perfect equilibrium ever. Here are the reasons. First of all, with regards to efficiency, equilibrium means the economy is it's flat, it's arrived at a point, but it's never that way. When they look at their models, when they look at the numbers, they're a reflection of yesterday, of last year and 10 years ago, and the real efficiency drivers in the economy are you and I. They're entrepreneurs, people who have goals. They have a means and they attempt to use that means to achieve the goals. The second part of it is prices. Obviously, for an economy, prices are very important. Prices are very important when we think of housing and the financial crisis. But prices, in the typical Marxist approach, and the approach that's used by most economists, including their treatment of the housing crisis, in their view, prices are objective. In other words, Marx says that it's the value product. It's the amount of hours you put into a good or a service is what that good or service should be used. So in other words, if you or I decide to make a painting, in my case, it would be a stick drawing. There's no doubt about it, it'd be a stick figure. If I spend 100 hours on that, and you value my labor, you give it an arbitrary number, say $20 an hour. You don't owe me that money. You owe me whatever it's worth to you. That's reality. Prices are actually subjective. That's the reason why in the housing crisis, the numbers were not reflecting reality. What you pay for a good or a service is your estimation of its value. There isn't some sort of perfect efficiency model, because it changes, because it's subjective, because it's in your mind, and you have, in our case, over 300 million people who are acting and choosing simultaneously, making subjective decisions. You don't have perfect equilibrium ever, and that's why this model breaks down. And the effect of externalities, well, I'll get into that a little more in a moment. But what you see here is they apply this then to develop a new technology. And I hope you're grasping right now that what's really taking place here is your standard socialist prescriptions. The arguments we're making here mostly apply across the board to why socialism doesn't work. It's the same principles. And so when they look at then the problems of externalities, the problems of the side effects of industry, they go back to what they use in general for economic development, and that is, how do you develop technology? Well, you have command and control. You have a board, you have experts who get together, they decide what the extra cost should be for people who are producing externalities. So that's where essentially cap and trade comes from. It's your old socialist approach, and it fails for these same reasons. So then what is the free market perspective? Well, I hinted at it earlier, that it's property rights, and I'm sure most of you know what they are, what they mean, and their impact, but just real quick and brief, I'll go over property rights and what they mean. Property rights, especially in terms of the environment, are conflict resolution, or is conflict resolution. That might sound nebulous or not what you're used to. Of course, the typical and the usual and the correct view of property rights is that they denote ownership of a property over goods, over yourself, first of all. And that's what I believe, that our freedom and our right to property starts with our ownership of ourselves. And that extends to whatever resources we've mixed our labor and our time with. And of course, you have to have a clear title to that property. That is what prosperity is built on. The American Revolution was a revolution of property. Back in the 1700s, there was a greater degree of freedom in the colonies than there was anywhere else in the world. But still, freedom even then existed, at least theoretically in the law, as a grant from the king. Properties, charters were given by the king. He gave land, and all your rights and freedoms as a colonist depended on the king's his mood. it wasn't always so arbitrary. That's essentially the foundation. But the American Revolution built it on the individual's right of self-ownership, your right to your property that's inalienable. It's given by God, that comes from natural law, wherever, but it's yours, and it's not given to you. So when we apply that then to the definition of property rights, think of it in a very simple manner. We're all living on a desert island. This group here, right? It's small. There's limited resources. There's not a lot of water. We have to fish and make bows and arrows, do whatever. There's going to be a lot of conflict of resources immediately, because the debate is going to be about who owns what, who can fish in a certain area, and so that's where property rights come from. Is you have to chop up the island, do whatever to separate it into individual units, and people have a claim to a certain area, to a certain set of property. That's how it originates. Farming. The only way you produce more than crash and burn agriculture, for example. If you're a native and you go through the jungle, you find a spot, you burn down the trees, you grow some vegetables, whatever you do, and then when that land is depleted, you move on. And technically, in that kind of environment, we exhaust resources very quickly. They're gone. The trees are burned, the land is wasted, and you could starve. Why then do we produce so much more food now? The reason is property rights. When people have ownership of that strip of land, they're going to have to stay on the same piece of land. They're going to have to learn agriculture and develop differently. That's why crop yields start rising. Of course, when crop yields start rising, the next tribe over can come and raid your settlement and take your goods. And so you have to have rights to your land, and you have to be able to protect it. That's property rights. It's a way to deal with conflict. It's conflict resolution. And this is very important then with treating these three aspects of the environment, is scarcity, waste, and technology, and how we deal with these issues stems from that principle of property rights, and property rights as a resolution of conflict. So I want to start first with scarcity. Scarcity, and